Picture this: the Great Pyramid of Giza, standing silent against the desert sky for more than 4,000 years, or the soaring spires of Notre-Dame Cathedral, rising like stone prayers above the Seine. These aren't just buildings, they're sacred architecture, monuments carved by human hands, but reaching for something far beyond us. Think of the generations that have passed beneath their shadows, the whispers of devotion, the silent awe of pilgrims and kings. Each stone was laid with intention, each corridor designed to guide the soul closer to the divine. What if I told you these structures are more than just beautiful relics? They're bridges between earth and heaven, between the mortal and the eternal. From the moment our ancestors first stacked stones into altars, sacred architecture has been humanity's way of making the invisible visible. The pyramids aligned with celestial constellations, Gothic cathedrals built to capture heaven's light, temples carved into mountains as if to touch the gods themselves. These aren't accidents. They're deliberate, dazzling conversations between faith and form, and hidden within their walls are secrets we're still unraveling today. This is a journey across time and continents, from the oldest known temples to modern sanctuaries that defy tradition. We'll walk through hypostyle halls where pharaohs once stood, decode the geometric perfection of Islamic mosques, and uncover why a Buddhist stupa's curves are meant to mirror the cosmos. Along the way, you'll see how sacred architecture isn't just about religion. It's about human ingenuity, communal hope, and the timeless longing to find meaning in the spaces we shape. So come with me, let's step inside these wonders, not just as tourists, but as explorers peeling back layers of stone and story. Because to understand these buildings is to understand the very heart of who we are and what we've always dared to believe. From the very beginning, humans have felt the need to carve out spaces that transcend the everyday places where the earthly and the divine seem to touch. Sacred architecture isn't just about shelter or beauty, it's about creating a physical doorway to the sacred. Think of the Great Pyramid of Giza, its precise corners pointing to the stars like a celestial compass, or the way Chartres cathedral's stained glass transforms sunlight into a kaleidoscope of holy narratives. These structures weren't built for practicality alone. They were designed to elevate, to pull the gaze upward, to humble the heart, and to anchor communities in something greater than themselves. At their core, sacred spaces serve three profound purposes. First, they're vessels for ritual. Whether it's the labyrinthine corridors of Egyptian temples, where only priests could enter the inner sanctum, or the open courtyards of Hindu temples, where devotees circle the deity in prayer, architecture shapes how we worship. The very layout of these buildings guides movement, choreographing reverence. Second, they're cosmic maps. The pyramids of Teotihuacan align with the sun's path during equinoxes, while Stonehenge's stones frame the solstice sunrise. Ancient builders didn't just observe the heavens, they etched them into the earth, turning stone into a kind of frozen astronomy. And third, these structures are communal heartbeats. Gothic cathedrals, often taking centuries to complete, became projects that bound entire cities together. Generations of laborers, artisans, and believers poured their lives into these walls, making faith visible and collective. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how sacred architecture embodies belief. In Islamic mosques, the absence of figurative art and the endless repetition of geometric patterns whisper a central tenet: God is beyond human representation. In Buddhist stupas, the circular mandala design mirrors the cycle of rebirth, while the spire points to enlightenment. Even the materials matter. The gold mosaics of Byzantine churches weren't just decoration. They were meant to mimic divine light, as if heaven itself shimmered on the walls. Every curve, every pillar, every shadow is a theological statement. And then there's the sheer awe. Walk into the Pantheon in Rome, where the oculus opens a perfect circle to the sky, and you'll feel it. The architects didn't just want you to see the divine, they wanted you to feel dwarfed by it. Sacred spaces are engineered to overwhelm the senses, whether through the echoing chants in a Tibetan monastery or the way Borobudur's terraces lead pilgrims step by step toward nirvana. This isn't accidental, it's psychology carved in stone. So why did our ancestors go to such lengths? Because sacred architecture is humanity's boldest attempt to answer the unanswerable. When language fails, we build. When prayers feel small, we raise towers. And somewhere in the silence of these spaces between the aligned stones and the vaulted ceilings, we've always hoped to hear something echo back. Of course, this urge to build the sacred didn't start with pyramids or cathedrals. Long before empires rose, people were already stacking stones into circles, carving temples from cliffs, and marking the earth with symbols only the gods could read. To understand how it all began, we have to travel way back, to a time when sacred architecture was just taking its first, tentative steps. Long before the pyramids pierced the horizon or cathedrals scraped the sky, humanity's first sacred structures were rising from the earth, not with the grandeur of empires, but with something far more mysterious. Take Göbekli Tepe, a sprawling complex of carved limestone pillars in Turkey, buried for 12,000 years. What's astonishing isn't just its age, older than Stonehenge by 6 millennia, but the fact that it was built by hunter-gatherers. These weren't farmers with settled lives or rulers commanding armies. They were nomads, yet they hauled 20-ton stones, etching them with intricate reliefs of lions, scorpions, and vultures. Why? Archaeologists used to assume religion emerged after agriculture, a luxury of stable societies. But Göbekli Tepe flips that script. Here, it seems, spirituality came first, and the need to honor the sacred may have been what pulled people together, sparking civilization itself. Then there's Stonehenge, its hulking sarsen stones aligned with the solstices like a colossal celestial clock. But here's the twist, some of its blue stones were dragged over 200 miles from Wales. Imagine the effort centuries before wheels or metal tools to transport these monoliths, possibly by sledges and rafts. The why is even more intriguing. Recent excavations reveal cremated human bones near the site, suggesting Stonehenge was less a temple for the living and more a bridge to the ancestors. The summer solstice sunrise, piercing the heel stone to flood the central altar with light, might have been a moment when the veil between worlds grew thin. These sites share an uncanny precision. The circular enclosures of Göbekli Tepe mirror later Mesopotamian temples, while Stonehenge's alignments track lunar cycles with eerie accuracy. Were they observatories, sacred calendars, or perhaps theaters for rituals we can barely imagine? Some theorists point to the acoustic properties of these spaces, how whispers echo strangely off standing stones, or how drumbeats might have synchronized with celestial events. It's as if these builders understood something we're only now rediscovering. That architecture can shape not just space, but time and sound, weaving them into the ritual. What's striking is the absence of obvious dwellings nearby. At Göbekli Tepe, there are no homes, no granaries, just rings of pillars deliberately buried over millennia, as if their purpose was fleeting, their power too potent to leave exposed. At Stonehenge, the nearby Durrington walls held vast feasting pits, hinting at seasonal gatherings where thousands converged, then vanished. These weren't cities, they were pilgrimage sites, magnets for the faithful across generations. And then there are the quieter wonders like Newgrange in Ireland. Its passage tomb designed so the winter solstice sun creeps down a narrow tunnel to illuminate the inner chamber for just 17 minutes a year. Or the Mnajdra temples of Malta, where equinox sunlight slices through doorways to mark the changing seasons. These weren't just buildings, they were dialogues with the cosmos, stone prayers etched into the landscape. What unites these ancient sites is their makers' willingness to pour lifetimes into the invisible. No written records explain their purpose, no carvings boast of kings or gods. Just stones aligned to stars, whispering of a time when the sacred wasn't something you believed, it was something you built. And as these early experiments in sacred architecture grew more sophisticated, so too would humanity's vision of the divine, leading to the next chapter, the rise of monumental temples where gods walked among men and stone became scripture. Step into the shadow of Karnak temple's towering pylons, and you're stepping into a mirror of the cosmos itself. Egyptian temples weren't just buildings, they were meticulously designed universes in stone, where every column, corridor, and carving held cosmic significance. Take the hypostyle hall at Karnak, a forest of 134 columns so dense they blot out the sun. Walking through them feels like wandering through primordial reeds, echoing the myth of creation where life emerged from watery chaos. The columns rise like papyrus stalks, their capitals blooming into lotus or palm shapes, symbolizing the marsh where the sun god Ra first appeared. Even the floor slopes upward toward the sanctuary, forcing priests to ascend physically and spiritually as they moved closer to the gods. At the heart of every Egyptian temple lay the naos, a windowless shrine housing the deity's statue. Only the pharaoh or high priests could enter this inner sanctum, where rituals like dressing the statue or offering food blurred the line between worship and sustaining the divine. The temple wasn't just a place to pray, it was the god's literal home, with doors aligned so the rising sun would bathe the statue in light during festivals. At Abu Simbel, Ramses II took this idea further, cutting an entire mountain into twin temples. Here, twice a year, sunlight pierces 60 meters into the rock to illuminate statues of Ra and Amun, all while bypassing Ptah, god of darkness, who remains forever in shadow. This wasn't architecture, it was celestial choreography. The pharaohs understood something profound. Sacred space could solidify power. Those towering pylons at temple entrances. They weren't just imposing, they were propaganda. Carved with scenes of the king smiting enemies, they proclaimed his role as the god's chosen defender. Even the temple's layout reinforced hierarchy. Commoners could only approach the outer courts, while elites progressed through increasingly restricted zones. By controlling access to the divine, pharaohs turned faith into political theater. The message was clear: just as the gods ruled the cosmos, the pharaoh ruled Egypt. Yet for all their grandeur, Egyptian temples also held secrets. Beneath Karnak's floors lie hidden crypts filled with ritual objects, their walls inscribed with spells meant to animate temple statues. Some chambers were so narrow priests had to crawl, recreating the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. And then there's the Opet festival, when statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu traveled from Karnak to Luxor on golden barges, reenacting the god's mythical reunion along the Nile. The temples weren't static, they pulsed with ritual life, their stones vibrating with chants, incense, and the clatter of sistrums. What made Egyptian sacred architecture unique was its obsession with duality. Temples mirrored the Nile's flood cycle, their outer courts open like fertile plains, their innermost shrines as sealed as the desert's mystery. They balanced light and shadow, noise and silence, accessibility and exclusion. Even their construction was sacred. Foundation deposits buried under corners contained models of tools, as if the temple itself were a living thing birthed by ritual. Compare this to the Greek temples we'll explore next, where divinity wasn't hidden in darkness but celebrated under open skies. Where Egyptian priests whispered in torchlit sanctuaries, Greek worshippers gathered in sunlight-drenched porticos, their gods as approachable as their architecture. The shift couldn't be starker, from the pharaoh's stone heavens to the human-scale harmony of the Parthenon. Imagine standing before the Parthenon at dawn, its honey-colored marble glowing as the first light strikes those legendary columns. What you're seeing isn't just a temple, it's mathematics made visible. The ancient Greeks didn't just build shrines to their gods, they crafted perfect harmonies in stone, where every curve and angle followed sacred ratios. Look closely and you'll notice the columns aren't straight, they bulge slightly in the middle, a subtle swelling called intosses that counteracts the optical illusion of concavity. Even the floor curves upward, also the human eye would perceive flawless straight lines. This was architecture as divine dialogue, where precision became an offering to Athena herself. Greek temples like the Parthenon were exercises in cosmic balance. Their strict Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian orders weren't just aesthetic choices, they were theological statements. The sturdy Doric columns of the Temple of Hephaestus embodied masculine strength, while the scroll-like Ionic capitals of the Erechtheion evoked feminine grace. And always there was symmetry, the cella inner chamber centered like a heart, the outer colonnade framing the landscape like a picture. Unlike Egypt's hidden sanctuaries, Greek temples placed the god's statue in a room surrounded by light-filled porticos, inviting worshippers to walk around it. Divinity here wasn't shrouded in mystery, it was celebrated in sunlight, as approachable as a neighbor. But the Romans took this reverence for order and scaled it to imperial grandeur. Enter the Pantheon, a masterpiece that still leaves architects breathless. That soaring dome 43 meters wide, with an oculus open to the heavens, wasn't just engineering bravado. It was theology in concrete. The dome's weight lessens as it rises, its coffered ceiling shifting from heavy squares to airy patterns, mirroring the soul's ascent from earthly burdens to celestial lightness. And when rain falls through the oculus, it vanishes into drains hidden beneath the marble floor, as if the earth itself swallowed the sky's tears. Here, religion and civic pride fused. The Pantheon honored all gods but also celebrated Rome's dominion over the known world. What's fascinating is how these designs reflected their cultures. Greek temples stood alone on hilltops, elegant and self-contained like their philosophy. Roman shrines, by contrast, nestled into bustling forums, their faith woven into daily life. The Temple of Vesta, with its eternal flame tended by priestesses, literally kept Rome's destiny burning. Even the materials spoke volumes. Greek marble gleamed bright and pure, while Roman concrete, mixed with volcanic ash, made audacious shapes possible, just as their empire absorbed and remade entire cultures. Yet perhaps the most revolutionary shift was still to come. As Christianity emerged from the catacombs, it needed spaces for congregational worship, something foreign to pagan temples designed for outdoor rituals. The answer: basilicas, Roman civic halls repurposed as churches, their long naves leading to altars where once magistrates held court. The message was clear: the new faith wasn't hiding in shadowy crypts but standing proudly in the heart of cities. And with this architectural reinvention, Christianity began reshaping sacred space in ways that would echo through the ages, leading us next to a realm where domes became heavens and light itself turned holy. Standing beneath the dome of Hagia Sophia is like standing under the sky itself, if the sky were held aloft by some unseen divine hand. When Emperor Justinian first entered this completed marvel in the year 537, he reportedly whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." And he wasn't wrong. This wasn't just a church, it was a revolution in stone, a place where architecture stopped being about walls and became about light. The dome, 55 meters high and seemingly weightless, wasn't supported by thick pillars but by a series of hidden arches and pendentives, curved triangles that distributed its load like invisible fingers. The effect, a canopy of gold mosaic that seemed to float, as if heaven had descended to earth. But the real magic was in the details. 40 windows pierce the dome's base, creating a ring of light that dissolves the boundary between structure and sky. At sunrise, shafts of sunlight strike the mosaics of angels and saints, making them appear to shimmer alive. The architects didn't just build a dome, they engineered epiphany. Even the materials were chosen for transcendence: bricks lighter than usual, mortar mixed with crushed pottery for elasticity, and marble shipped from across the empire, each slab strategically placed so its veins mirrored the flow of water or the folds of a robe. Walking through Hagia Sophia wasn't just movement through space, it was participation in a cosmic metaphor. Then there were the mosaics, not mere decorations, but theological arguments in glass and gold. In the apse, the Virgin Mary holds the Christ child, her figure bathed in light from the windows below, a visual echo of the doctrine that she was the window through which divinity entered the world. Later, after the Ottoman conquest, the mosaics were plastered over, but the dome remained, its Islamic calligraphy now coexisting with hidden Christian imagery. This layering of faiths makes Hagia Sophia a palimpsest of the sacred, where whispers of both the Kyrie eleison and the Adhan linger in the air. Byzantine architects didn't stop at one masterpiece. Their innovations rippled across the Orthodox world. Study the Church of the Holy Apostles in Thessaloniki or St. Mark's in Venice, and you'll see the same play of domes and light, the same insistence that a church should be a microcosm of creation. Even the layout spoke volumes: the central dome for Christ Pantocrator, ruler of all, the 4 surrounding vaults for the Gospels, the narthex as the threshold between profane and holy. Every element was a syllable in a silent hymn, yet for all its influence, Hagia Sophia's greatest legacy might be its defiance of gravity, both physical and spiritual. To stand beneath that dome is to feel, for a moment, that the ordinary rules don't apply, and it's this very sensation that would inspire the next great leap in sacred architecture, not in the sun-drenched East, but in the misty forests of medieval Europe, where builders would take the Byzantine love of light and stretch it into dizzying new heights. If the Byzantine dome was a vision of heaven suspended above, then Gothic cathedrals were humanity's defiant reach upward, stone fingers clawing at the sky. Walk into Chartres Cathedral, and your eyes instinctively lift toward the vaulted ceiling, 40 meters overhead. That reaction isn't accidental. Every element of Gothic design conspires to pull your gaze and your spirit skyward. The secret lies in 3 revolutionary innovations: ribbed vaults, pointed arches, and flying buttresses. Picture the ribbed vault first, a skeleton of stone ribs fanning across the ceiling, allowing walls to be hollowed out for colossal windows. Then the pointed arch, sharper than the Roman rounded arch, channeling weight downward with such efficiency that walls could soar higher without collapsing. But the real genius, the flying buttress, those graceful stone arms arcing away from the building like a dancer's outstretched limbs. They aren't just decorative, they're the hidden scaffolding, catching the roof's thrust and redirecting it outward, freeing the walls from their load-bearing duty. Without them, those walls would crumple under the weight of their own ambition. Now imagine the shock of medieval worshippers entering these spaces for the first time. After centuries of squat, dim Romanesque churches, Gothic cathedrals flooded interiors with light that streamed through stained glass, transforming biblical stories into glowing tapestries. At Chartres, the famous blue virgin window radiates a cobalt so vivid it seems to vibrate, while the rose window at Notre-Dame turns sunlight into a kaleidoscope of prophets and saints. This wasn't mere decoration, it was theology in color. The glass acted as a poor man's Bible, teaching scripture to the illiterate, while the play of light symbolized divine grace pouring into the world. Even the glass itself held mystery. Medieval recipes for cathedral red involved grinding gold into the mix, creating a hue so costly it was reserved for Christ's robes. Behind these wonders stood anonymous masters architects who signed their work only with cryptic sketches in labyrinthine floor designs, and guilds of masons who guarded their geometric secrets like alchemists. At Cologne Cathedral, the original 14th century plans were so precise that 19th century builders could complete the unfinished spires using the same templates. These craftsmen didn't just cut stone, they encoded it with meaning. Look closely at gargoyles. Those grotesque rainspouts weren't random horrors. They embodied the belief that even the monstrous could serve the sacred, channeling chaos into purpose. Yet Gothic cathedrals were more than engineering feats. They were communal acts of faith. Building one could take 200 years, generations laboring for a glory they'd never see finished. Villagers hauled stones, nobles donated relics, and children gathered straw to cushion fragile glass during transport. The cathedrals became living chronicles. Their stones bear masons' marks like signatures. Their foundations hold coins and pilgrim badges tossed in for luck. Their very asymmetry, like Chartres' mismatched spires, betrays the human hands behind the divine vision. This vertical obsession wasn't just about aesthetics. It mirrored a medieval worldview where hierarchy was cosmic, earth below, heaven above. The higher the vault, the closer to God. Even the floor plans echoed the cross, turning worshippers into participants in a spatial sermon. And when choirs filled the nave with polyphonic chants, the acoustics made it seem as if angels were singing back from the clerestory. But while Europe's cathedrals stretched toward the heavens, sacred architecture elsewhere took radically different forms, like the Islamic world's embrace of horizontality and infinite pattern, or Angkor Wat's mountain temples mirroring the Hindu cosmos. The Gothic spire was just one answer to an eternal question. How does stone speak of the sacred? Step into the great mosque of Cordoba, and you'll find yourself standing in a forest of arches, rows upon rows of striped horseshoe arches, their red and white voussoirs alternating like the breath of some divine rhythm. But look closer. The columns supporting them aren't uniform. They're recycled from Roman and Visigothic ruins, a tangible reminder that Islamic sacred architecture often wove the old into the new, repurposing materials but reinventing meaning. The mosque's most breathtaking feature, the mihrab, a prayer niche framed by an intricate mosaic of gold and blue, its geometric patterns radiating outward like ripples in a celestial pond. This isn't just decoration, it's theology in tile. Islamic art avoids figurative representations of the divine, not as a restriction, but as a revelation. God's infinity can't be captured in human form, only hinted at through endless repetition, fractals, and the precise beauty of mathematics. Now cross continents to the Taj Mahal, where white marble seems to dissolve into the sky at dawn. Here, geometry becomes poetry. The entire complex is a study in mirrored symmetry, the reflecting pool doubling the mausoleum's grandeur, the four minarets tilting slightly outward so they'd never crush the tomb in an earthquake. Even the calligraphy adorning its walls plays a visual trick. The Quranic verses increase in size as they ascend, ensuring perfect proportionality to the viewer's eye below. Every detail whispers the same truth: order is sacred, but the real marvel is how water is used as an architectural element. The Yamuna River flows behind the Taj, not just for aesthetics, but to symbolize the rivers of paradise described in Islamic texts. The building's reflection in the pool isn't just pretty, it's a metaphor for the soul's journey toward the divine, where earthly beauty is a shadow of heavenly perfection. What unites these masterpieces is their obsession with the unseen. Where Gothic cathedrals reach vertically, Islamic architecture sprawls horizontally, inviting contemplation rather than awe. The arabesques, those interlacing vines and floral motifs, aren't random. They're mathematical expressions of the infinite, patterns that could theoretically repeat forever without beginning or end. Even the absence of figurative art serves a purpose. By excluding human or animal forms, the space becomes a blank canvas for the worshipper's inner vision, directing focus inward toward prayer rather than outward toward idols. Then there's the role of light. In the Mosque of Ibn Chaldun in Cairo, sunlight filters through pierced stucco screens, casting ever-shifting lacework shadows on the floor. Unlike the stained glass of Christian cathedrals, which tells fixed stories, Islamic light is dynamic, a reminder of God's unchanging nature amidst a changing world. And sound, the domes of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul are designed to amplify the Imam's voice without echo, so every word hangs clear in the air like a single note in a silent room. But perhaps the most profound contrast lies ahead as we journey eastward, where Islamic architecture abstracts divinity into pattern and calligraphy. Hindu temples will confront us with a riot of sculpted deities, and Buddhist stupas will strip ornamentation down to serene simplicity. The same longing for the sacred expressed in utterly different vocabularies of stone. Climbing the steep steps of Angkor Wat at sunrise, you're not just ascending a temple, you're scaling the universe itself. Those towering shikaras, the temple's central spires, aren't merely decorative. They're stone embodiments of Mount Meru, the mythical axis of the Hindu cosmos. Every inch of this sprawling Cambodian complex is a coded map of existence. The moat, not just a defensive feature, but the primordial ocean, the concentric galleries. Layers of reality from the earthly to the divine. Even the bas-reliefs tell a story in motion. As you walk the 800 meters of carved panels, you're tracing the epic narratives of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, your footsteps mirroring the journey of the soul toward enlightenment. Now shift your gaze to Khajuraho's temples in India, where the shikaras cluster like mountain peaks, each one a rhythmic echo of the others. Here, the sacred isn't just above, it's everywhere. The walls pulse with intricate carvings, gods and goddesses locked in cosmic dance, celestial nymphs frozen mid-twirl, even scenes of earthly passion. Far from mere ornament, these sculptures are theological arguments in stone. The famous erotic carvings aren't titillation. They're a celebration of the life force, as one of Hinduism's 4 sacred aims, alongside duty dharma, prosperity artha, and liberation moksha. The entire temple becomes a mandala, a geometric diagram of the cosmos, with the sanctum at its center housing the deity, just as Mount Meru stands at the heart of creation. What's astonishing is the precision. At the Kandariya Mahadeva temple, the tallest shikara rises 31 meters, its surface carved with 872 smaller spires, each a miniature echo of the whole. This fractal repetition mirrors Hindu cosmology, where the macrocosm and microcosm reflect one another endlessly. Even the temple's orientation is deliberate. Many Hindu temples face east, aligning with the rising sun, while their innermost chambers grow progressively darker, symbolizing the soul's journey from external ritual to inner revelation. But perhaps the most profound innovation lies in the temple's function as a cosmic clock. At Konark's Sun Temple, designed as a colossal chariot with 12 pairs of stone wheels, the architecture tracks time itself. The wheels act as sundials, their spokes casting shadows that mark the hours with uncanny accuracy. the temple isn't just a place to worship the sun god Surya. It becomes his celestial vehicle, frozen in mid-journey across the heavens. Yet for all this complexity, Hindu temple architecture shares a universal goal: to dissolve the boundary between human and divine. When priests perform the ritual of awakening the deity Prana Pratishtha, the temple transforms from mere stone into a living body for the god. The spire isn't just a symbol of Mount Meru. It becomes a conduit channeling cosmic energy downward as worshippers' prayers spiral upward. This lush symbolic density makes the shift to Buddhist architecture all the more striking. Where Hindu temples burst with narrative carvings and tiered meanings, Buddhist stupas will strip ornamentation down to elemental forms, a silent reminder that enlightenment lies not in complexity but in stillness. At the great stupa of Sanchai, the air hums with a quiet that feels almost physical, a stillness carved into stone 2,000 years ago. Unlike the intricate carvings of Hindu temples or the soaring vaults of cathedrals, this massive hemispherical dome radiates simplicity. But don't mistake simplicity for emptiness. Every curve here is a sermon. The stupa's circular base symbolizes the eternal wheel of Dharma, while the square railing atop it represents the earthly realm. The central pillar, or yasti, pierces through the dome like an axis mundi, connecting earth to the heavens, its three-tiered chakras umbrellas echoing the Buddha's three jewels: the teacher, the teaching, and the community. To walk clockwise around the stupa, as pilgrims have done for centuries, is to trace the path of the sun, mirroring the cyclical nature of existence and the journey toward awakening. Now journey east to Japan's Todai-ji, home of the great Buddha. Here, the pagoda's tiered roofs stack like layers of consciousness ascending toward nirvana. Each tier narrows as it rises, a visual metaphor for shedding worldly attachments. The pagoda's original 7 stories, rebuilt after fires, mirrored the 7 steps of enlightenment, while the central pillar, embedded with relics, anchored the structure both physically and spiritually. These relics weren't mere ornaments, they were the heartbeat of the pagoda. Believed to be fragments of the Buddha's ashes or personal objects, they transformed the building from architecture into a living vessel of his presence. Monks would meditate in the shadow of these relics, their practice deepening as the pagoda's height amplified the sense of transcendence. What's striking is how these structures choreograph movement and stillness. At Sanchai, the circumambulation path forces a slow, mindful pace, the act of walking becoming meditation. At Todai-ji, the pagoda's interior, often dim and hushed, invites seated contemplation. Even the materials speak. Sanchai's bricks were left unpolished, a reminder of impermanence, while Todai-ji's lacquered wood gleams like the promise of purity. The contrast reveals a core Buddhist truth: enlightenment isn't a single form but a spectrum, from the rugged earthiness of Sanchai to the refined elegance of Nara. Yet the real genius lies in what's unseen. Stupas and pagodas are cosmic maps in 3 dimensions. The Harmika, a small square railing atop Sanchai's dome, marks the boundary between the mundane and the enlightened mind, just as the pagoda's finial pierces the sky, a needle threading earth to emptiness. And always there's the interplay of solid and void, the stupa's solid dome hiding relic chambers within, the pagoda's seemingly weightless tiers anchored by massive central pillars. These aren't contradictions, they're teachings in balance, stone whispers of the middle way. As the morning mist clings to Todai-ji's eaves, it's easy to forget that halfway across the world, another sacred architecture was rising, not from the quietude of Buddhism, but from the vibrant pulse of Mesoamerican civilizations. There, pyramids weren't just monuments, they were mountains touching the sky, their steps drenched in the golden light of equinoxes. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun doesn't just dominate the landscape, it is the landscape. Climbing its 248 steps feels less like ascending a building and more like scaling a mountain forged by gods. The ancients called this place the city where men become gods, and standing atop this colossal structure at dawn, watching the sun's first rays slice through the Valley of Mexico, you begin to understand why. But here's what's truly astonishing. The pyramid's western face aligns precisely with the setting sun on August 12th, a date that marked the beginning of the Mesoamerican calendar cycle. The entire city is a celestial blueprint, the avenue of the dead mirrors, the Milky Way, while the Pyramid of the Moon frames the Pleiades at its zenith. This wasn't urban planning, it was cosmology etched into stone. Now shift your gaze to Chichen Itza, where El Castillo's 91 steps on each of its 4 sides plus the top platform equal 365, a stone calendar counting the solar year. But the real magic happens during equinoxes. As the sun sets, shadows slither down the pyramid's northern staircase, merging with stone serpent heads at the base to create the illusion of a feathered serpent slithering from the heavens. This isn't just artistry, it's an act of sacred theater where architecture, astronomy, and mythology fuse into a single, breathtaking moment. The pyramid becomes a portal, its stones whispering of Kukulkan's promise to return. Contrary to popular imagination, these pyramids weren't primarily stages for bloodshed. While ritual sacrifice did occur, often involving offerings of jade, flowers, or rare birds, the notion of constant human slaughter is more Hollywood than history. At Teotihuacan, archaeologists find evidence of communal feasting near the pyramids, with remains of rabbits, deer, and even chocolate vessels used in shared ceremonies. The true purpose of these structures was far more profound. They were bridges between realms. The tallid table row designed sloping walls topped by rectangular panels wasn't just decorative. It symbolized the alternating layers of the underworld and the heavens. Priests climbing these steps weren't just performing rituals, they were reenacting the cosmic journey of souls. What's often overlooked is the sound. At Chichen Itza, a clap at the base of El Castillo produces an echo mimicking the Quetzal bird's sacred cry, an acoustic marvel achieved through precisely calculated stair angles. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Moon amplifies whispers between its twin temples, turning human voices into spectral echoes. These weren't accidental effects. They were carefully engineered to disorient the senses, dissolving the boundary between the mortal world and the divine. Yet for all their grandeur, these sites share a quiet humility with their builders. The pyramids lack the boastful inscriptions of Egyptian pharaohs or Roman emperors. No names of kings are carved into these stones, only the silent testimony of aligned basalt and limestone, waiting centuries for us to decode their secrets. And as the last light fades from Teotihuacan's painted murals, once vibrant with scarlet cochineal and Maya blue, we're reminded that sacred architecture speaks loudest when it lets the cosmos take center stage. But while Mesoamerican pyramids stretch toward the sky, another continent's sacred spaces emerge from the earth itself, like Ethiopia's Lalibela, where entire churches were hewn downward into volcanic rock, as if the land itself yearned to become holy. Carved not from stone but into it, the churches of Lalibela seem to defy the very laws of architecture. Imagine workers in the 12th century chiseling downward into solid volcanic rock, excavating not just buildings but entire sacred landscapes, 11 monolithic churches connected by a labyrinth of tunnels and trenches. The most stunning, Beta Georgis, stands 15 meters tall, its cruciform shape sunk into the earth like a celestial stamp. The builders didn't just construct, they revealed, uncovering what they believed was a heavenly blueprint hidden within the rock. According to legend, angels themselves guided the chisels by day while continuing the work invisibly at night. But the real miracle lies in the details: windows cut to align with solstice sunlight, drainage channels carved to prevent flooding, even a network of aqueducts feeding baptismal fonts, all executed with nothing but hand tools and celestial precision. 1,000 miles south, the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rise like a mirage from the savannah. This wasn't just a city, it was a spiritual capital, its name meaning House of Stone in Shona. The great enclosure, with its 10-meter-high dry stone walls curving like a coiled serpent, contains a mysterious conical tower, its purpose still debated, though some suggest it symbolized grain storage, a sacred nod to prosperity and ancestral connection. Unlike Lalibella's top-down excavation, Great Zimbabwe's builders worked from the ground up, stacking granite blocks without mortar, each stone painstakingly shaped to fit its neighbor. The result, walls so tight a blade of grass can't slip between them. The city thrived as a pilgrimage site between the 11th and 15th centuries, drawing worshippers to its hilltop acropolis where rainmaking ceremonies honored the ancestors. Yet for all their grandeur, these sites suffered a modern heresy. Colonial archaeologists once insisted Africans couldn't have built them. Great Zimbabwe was absurdly attributed to Phoenicians or the Queen of Sheba, while Lalibella's churches were dismissed as derivative of European Gothic styles. This erasure wasn't just academic, it severed living connections. At Lalibela, priests still chant ancient jazz hymns in the rock-hewn sanctuaries, their incense mingling with the scent of candle wax on walls worn smooth by centuries of kissed stone. At Great Zimbabwe, descendants of the Shona maintain oral histories of the site's spiritual role, even as Victorian explorers looted its artifacts for European museums. What makes these spaces revolutionary is their inversion of sacred geometry. Where Gothic cathedrals reach skyward, Lalibella's churches descend into the earth, as if holiness could be mined like a precious vein. Where Islamic mosques sprawl outward in fractal patterns, Great Zimbabwe's walls spiral inward, guiding pilgrims toward intimate encounter. Both whisper a truth mainstream narratives often ignore. Pre-colonial Africa hosted sophisticated spiritual cosmologies, their sacred architecture as intentional as charters, stained glass or Angkor Wat's alignment with the stars. As the morning mist clings to Lalibella's rock-hewn crosses, we're reminded that sacred exchange wasn't confined by continents. Just as these African masterpieces were being perfected, the medieval Islamic world was weaving its own architectural dialogues between Persian domes and Andalusian courtyards, between mathematical rigor and the poetry of space. In the dusty ruins of Dura Europos near the Euphrates River, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary, a 3rd-century synagogue whose walls blazed with vibrant frescoes of biblical stories. This discovery shattered assumptions. Unlike later Jewish traditions that avoided figurative art, here was Moses parting the Red Sea in vivid pigments, Abraham raising his knife over Isaac, even Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, all rendered with a narrative flair more common in Christian cathedrals. The shock: this synagogue stood just blocks from an early Christian house church and a Mithraic temple, their artworks sharing stylistic fingerprints. Far from existing in isolation, these sacred spaces were in conversation, borrowing visual languages across faith lines. The synagogue's ceiling even mimicked the celestial motifs of Roman pagan temples, its blue background studded with golden stars, proof that sacred architecture has always been porous, absorbing and adapting influences like a living thing. Now leap forward to medieval Europe, where Cologne's cathedral and Prague's Altneuschel tell a more complex story. At first glance, Gothic cathedrals and synagogues seem worlds apart. One all soaring vaults and stained glass, the other modest exteriors hiding intimate, wood-beamed sanctuaries. But look closer. The ribbed vaulting in Prague's synagogue mirrors the very churches that would later expel Jews during pogroms. The intricate stone tracery framing its Torah arch echoes the screenwork separating nave from choir in Christian cathedrals. Even the positioning mattered. Synagogues often stood just outside cathedral precincts, their architecture deliberately restrained to avoid provoking Christian authorities. Yet in Spain's Toledo, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians coexisted under Moorish rule, the synagogue of Santa Maria la Blanca's horseshoe arches and stucco arabesques could pass for a mosque until you spot the Hebrew inscriptions woven into the patterns. This architectural cross-pollination wasn't always peaceful. In Venice, the ghetto's synagogues squeezed into attic spaces, their lavish interiors hidden behind plain facades, a defensive measure against anti-Semitic violence. Meanwhile, churches like Santa Maria Novella in Florence displayed carved stone tablets of Jewish ritual objects taken as trophies after forced conversions. The very stones bore witness to both collaboration and coercion. Yet even in conflict, the exchange continued. Jewish masons employed on cathedral projects brought Middle Eastern mathematical knowledge to Gothic engineering, while Christian artisans crafted mikvehs, ritual baths with the same fine masonry as baptismal fonts. What emerges is a tapestry of borrowed light and shadow. The rose windows of Chartres find their echo in the circular stained glass of rare medieval synagogues like Worms, though the latter depicted menorahs instead of saints. Islamic mihrabs inspired both church apses and Torah niches, their shared geometric precision transcending theological divides. Even the humble synagogue's bema, the central platform for reading scripture, mirrored the spatial choreography of church pulpits, both designed to amplify sacred words to a gathered community. Yet this fluidity would soon crystallize into something new. As the Renaissance dawned, architects began sifting through the rubble of antiquity, seeking not just to imitate the past, but to perfect it. Where medieval builders had layered faith upon faith in restless innovation, the Renaissance would look back to rediscover the clean lines of Rome and the proportional harmonies of Greece, setting the stage for a revolution where sacred space would become both a mirror of heaven and a measure of mankind. Standing beneath Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, you're not just looking at a marvel of engineering, you're witnessing a revolution in thought. When Filippo Brunelleschi cracked the secret of constructing this colossal dome in the 15th century, he didn't just solve a technical puzzle, he redefined humanity's relationship with the divine. The dome's secret, a double shell design with an inner and outer layer bound by hidden chains of stone and iron, rising without wooden centering, a feat many deemed impossible. But what's truly groundbreaking is the philosophy behind it. This wasn't just architecture, it was geometry as worship. The dome's perfect proportions, its height matching its diameter, creating a harmonious hemisphere, echoed the Renaissance belief that God had ordered the universe through mathematical laws. To build with such precision was to mirror the mind of the Creator. Now cross the Alps to St. Peter's Basilica, where Michelangelo, at age 72, took Bramante's original plans and infused them with sculptural grandeur. His dome, though inspired by Brunelleschi's, pushed the limits even further. Notice how the ribs taper upward, drawing the eye toward the oculus as if pulling the soul toward heaven. The entire basilica is a study in sacred geometry. The nave's length exactly 3 times its width, the altar positioned at the center of a Greek cross, all reflecting the Renaissance obsession with Pythagorean harmonies. Even the Pietra Serena stone, with its cool gray tones, was chosen to create a sense of celestial serenity. This was architecture as theology, every measurement a psalm, every curve a prayer. What set Renaissance churches apart was their humanistic daring. For the first time, architects like Alberti argued that beauty wasn't just divinely inspired but calculable, governed by ratios like the golden section, which balanced asymmetry with perfect proportion. Look at Leon Battista Alberti's facade for Santa Maria Novella. The lower-level squares repeat in the upper-level circles, tying earthly stability to heavenly perfection. Even the materials whispered this duality: rough pietraforte for the base, smooth marble above, mirroring humanity's ascent from earthly to divine. Yet the real genius lay in how these spaces married art and faith. Michelangelo's Pietà, nestled in a side chapel of St. Peter's, turns marble into living grief, its folds of stone seeming to breathe. The Sistine Chapel's ceiling isn't just decoration. It's a visual Bible where the finger of God nearly touching atoms becomes the hinge between creation and redemption. This wasn't art for art's sake, it was worship through the hand, a belief that beauty could lead the soul to truth. But as the Renaissance's balanced harmonies began to feel too restrained, a new movement would erupt, one that traded geometry for drama and restraint for ecstasy. Where Brunelleschi sought perfect circles, Baroque architects would twist them into ellipses. Where Michelangelo's David stood in contemplative calm, Bernini's saints would writhe in divine rapture. The age of reason was giving way to the theater of the soul. Bernini's bronze baldachin in St. Peter's Basilica doesn't just stand, it twists upward, its spiraling columns seeming to writhe like living vines caught mid-revelation. This 26-meter-tall canopy over the papal altar isn't architecture, it's frozen ecstasy. The Baroque era didn't build, it performed, turning stone, light, and space into a sensory opera designed to overwhelm. Look closer at those columns. Their helical grooves aren't mere decoration. They mimic the ancient Solomonic columns said to have stood in Jerusalem's temple, linking the New Testament church to its biblical roots. But Bernini's genius lies in the details. The golden putty clinging to the base seem to giggle as they support the structure, while the cross at its pinnacle blazes against a sunburst of gilded rays. The message is unmistakable. Divinity isn't distant. It's dynamic, almost tactile in its immediacy. Now step into Rome's Church of the Gesù, Mother Church of the Jesuits, and you'll see Baroque's second weapon, light as liturgy. The ceiling fresco by Gaulli, The Triumph of the Name of Jesus, obliterates the boundary between painting and architecture. Painted figures spill beyond their frames, some tumbling into the viewer's space, others ascending into a golden void where the holy name blazes. The illusion is so convincing, you half expect the damned souls to crash onto the pews below. This wasn't just art, it was spiritual warfare, a counter-reformation tactic to reignite faith through sheer sensory bombardment. Jesuit churches became theaters of conversion, their undulating facades, gilded stucco, and strategically placed windows choreographing light to spotlight altars like divine spotlights. What made Baroque revolutionary was its psychology. Where Renaissance churches appealed to the intellect with perfect geometry, Baroque targeted the gut. The oval floor plans of churches like San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, designed by Borromini, create a sense of restless motion, their concave and convex walls breathing like living organisms. Ceilings dissolved into painted heavens, floors rose in undulating patterns, and hidden windows made altars glow as if lit from within. Even sound was weaponized. Organs thundered from choir lofts, their vibrations amplified by carefully calculated acoustics that made every chord feel like the voice of God. But perhaps the most subversive trick was the Baroque's embrace of imperfection. Bernini's ecstasy of Saint Teresa in Santa Maria della Vittoria shows the saint swooning, her robes billowing as an angel prepares to pierce her heart with a golden arrow. The sculpture's theatricality, the hidden window illuminating it from above, the polychrome marble framing it like a stage, turns private mysticism into public spectacle. This was sacred architecture as emotional contagion, designed to make believers feel before they understood. Yet even as Baroque churches reached their zenith, a new wind was blowing from Paris and London, one that valued reason over rapture. Enlightenment thinkers began to see these swirling forms as decadent, even deceptive. The same curves that made Borromini's San Ivo alla Sapienza feel like a divine whirlwind would soon give way to the crisp lines of Neoclassicism, where the divine wasn't a trembling ecstasy but a geometric certainty. The stones themselves seemed to whisper, emotion had its hour, but now order would reign. The Pantheon in Paris rises from its Latin Quarter hill like a geometric hymn, its dome echoing Rome's ancient temple, yet its purpose utterly transformed. Where the original Pantheon honored all gods, this 18th century monument enshrined revolutionary ideals. Aux grands hommes la patrie reconnaissante, to great men the grateful homeland. The shift was seismic. Architects like Jacques-Germain Soufflot didn't just borrow classical columns and pediments, they weaponized them in service of reason. The building's perfect symmetry, its Corinthian capitol stripped of Christian ornament, and its soaring dome resting on a Greek cross plan, all whispered a new creed, that enlightenment, not revelation, was the true path to the sublime. Even the light became ideological. The oculus, once a symbol of divine connection, now illuminated the tombs of Voltaire and Rousseau, philosophers who had challenged the Church's dominion over truth. Freemasonry's invisible hand shaped these temples of reason, lodges across Europe filled with architects, philosophers, and politicians, saw geometry as the language of the divine. Their sacred architecture wasn't about dogma but symbolism, compasses and squares carved into stone, staircases winding in sacred ratios, and altars aligned with solstice light. In Edinburgh, the Rosslyn Chapel's apprentice pillar twined with carved foliage hid Masonic codes. In Washington, D.C., the layout of the Capitol building mapped onto esoteric diagrams. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were silent sermons on universal harmony, suggesting that God or the grand architect could be decoded through mathematics, not scripture. Yet the tension between faith and reason played out in brick and mortar. London's St. Paul's Cathedral, though Anglican, borrowed the Pantheon's dome but crowned it with a cross, a reluctant compromise between Wren's scientific precision and the Church's demand. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson's design for the University of Virginia's rotunda directly quoted the Pantheon, declaring education the new liturgy. The very materials spoke volumes. Where Baroque churches had dripped with gold leaf, neoclassical temples favored unadorned stone, as if purity of form could scrub away superstition. Then came the Industrial Revolution, rattling these ideals with iron and steam. Suddenly, architects had new tools. Cast iron could span wider spaces, plate glass could flood interiors with light. But what would this mean for the sacred? Could a cathedral's majesty survive in an age of factories? The answer would come in soaring train stations masquerading as naves, and in the Gothic revival's desperate reach back toward a time before machines. By the time Big Ben's tower pierced the London fog in the mid-19th century, something unexpected was happening. Medieval architecture had come roaring back to life. The Gothic revival wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a full-blown cultural rebellion against the cold rationality of industrial Europe. Architects like Augustus Pugin, who designed the ornate interiors of London's Parliament, didn't just copy Gothic cathedrals, they weaponized them. Pugin famously called Gothic the only true Christian architecture, its pointed arches and vaulted ceilings a direct line to what he saw as a purer, more spiritual age. Every gargoyle scowling from a rainspout, Every traceried window filtering smoky London light was a deliberate snub to the factory chimneys belching steam nearby. But why did this medieval obsession take hold just as railroads and telegraphs were shrinking the world? The answer lies in a potent mix of nationalism and nostalgia. St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, with its lace-like spires rising above Fifth Avenue, wasn't just a church, it was a statement. For Irish immigrants, its Gothic grandeur declared their faith's endurance despite persecution. In England, Parliament's Gothic towers became symbols of a mythic past, tying the British Empire to the imagined chivalry of King Arthur's court. Even the materials carried political weight. When architect James Renwick insisted on using American sandstone for St. Patrick's instead of imported marble, he wasn't just cutting costs, he was asserting that Gothic glory could take root in the New World. The movement thrived on contradictions. Industrialization made Gothic revival possible. Mass-produced steel frameworks hid behind stone facades, and steam-powered tools carved details that once took masons decades. Yet these buildings pretended to reject the very machines that birthed them. Oxford's Museum of Natural History, with its iron and glass roof disguised by Gothic arches, was like a medieval manuscript written in factory ink. Then there was the emotional alchemy. Gothic revival wasn't about historical accuracy, it was about feeling. The vaulted ceilings of Budapest's Parliament building, dripping with gold leaf and heraldic shields, stirred Hungarian pride after centuries of Habsburg rule. In Montreal, Notre-Dame Basilica's azure ceiling studded with golden stars turned Mass into celestial theater. These spaces didn't just house rituals, they staged them, using stained glass and shadow to manufacture awe in an age of doubt. Yet for all its romance, the Gothic revival sowed the seeds of its own demise. By clinging so tightly to the past, it left little room for the spiritual questions of the modern world. As the 20th century dawned, a new generation of architects would ask, why whisper to God in a medieval language when you could shout or stay silent in steel and concrete? The sacred was about to shed its borrowed skins. Le Corbusier's Ronchamp Chapel perches on a French hillside like a white concrete cloud, its curved walls swelling and receding as if breathing, its roof floating like a nun's cowl over thick, fortress-like walls. This isn't just a chapel, it's a rebellion. Completed in 1954, Ronchamp tossed aside centuries of sacred geometry, replacing right angles with organic curves and stained glass with irregular slits that scatter light like shattered hymns. The thick south wall, studded with windows of varying sizes, transforms sunlight into a flickering dance across the rough concrete. No 2 days' light patterns alike. Here, the sacred isn't found in symmetry, but in surprise. Le Corbusier, an avowed atheist, designed a space that feels transcendent without dogma, proving that spirituality could thrive in the abstract. The chapel's most striking feature, that roof, seemingly weightless, actually anchors into the walls with a hidden spine of steel, a secret echoing the paradox of faith itself, heavy with tradition yet buoyant with mystery. Now cross the Atlantic to Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple in Illinois, where sacred space becomes a cube of sanctuary. Built in 1908, this was among the first modern religious buildings to use poured concrete, a material then associated with factories, not worship. Wright's genius was in its restraint. The exterior, unadorned and geometric, gives no hint of the luminous interior, where amber light filters through stained glass ceilings onto oak-lined walls. Unlike Gothic cathedrals that pull the eye upward, Unity Temple turns inward, its low ceiling and intimate scale creating a hush as palpable as a forest glade. The pulpit sits not at the end of a long nave, but centered among the pews, reflecting Wright's Unitarian belief in communal connection over hierarchical ritual. Even the building's nickname, the Temple of the Spirit, hints at its revolution. The divine isn't out there, but here in the gathered human circle. Yet these innovations sparked fierce debate. Does stripping away ornament, replacing gold mosaics with raw concrete, vaulted arches with flat plains, deepen the sacred or dilute it? Critics argue modern minimalism can feel sterile, trading the layered symbolism of medieval cathedrals for blank walls that leave too much unsaid. Where's the awe in an unadorned cube? But defenders counter that emptiness is the point. Just as Buddhist zendos use bare walls to quiet the mind, Ronchamp's curves and Unity's simplicity create space for personal encounter, free from prescriptive imagery. The sacred, they insist, isn't in the artist's hand, but in the silence between strokes. This tension birthed astonishing diversity. In Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer's Cathedral of Brasilia floats 16 hyperboloid concrete pillars toward the sky, their glass ceiling revealing the heavens like an open eye. In Japan, Tadao Ando's Church of the Light slits a concrete wall with a cruciform window, turning sunlight into a blazing cross at dawn. Each wrestles with the same question: how to house the ineffable in an age of skepticism. And now, a new frontier emerges, spaces where faiths converge. The Lotus Temple in Delhi, with its petal-like marble wings, welcomes worshippers of all religions to sit in silent meditation beneath its central dome. The nine-sided design deliberately avoids any single tradition's symbols. Its open doors a manifesto in stone. Similarly, the Nineveh Chapel in Amsterdam weaves Christian, Jewish, and Islamic calligraphy into its walls, their sacred scripts intertwining like roots of a single tree. These designs don't just tolerate pluralism, they celebrate it, suggesting that the divine might be too vast for any one architecture to contain. Yet challenges remain. Can a space equally honor the rhythmic prostrations of Muslim prayer, the communal hymns of Christian worship, and the silent zazen of Buddhist meditation? Some interfaith designs opt for adaptable elements, movable chairs instead of pews, adjustable lighting for mood, or rotating art that reflects different holy days. Others, like the proposed House of One in Berlin, literally split the building into 3 zones: church, synagogue, mosque, sharing a common forum. The experiment is messy, alive, and utterly contemporary, a recognition that the sacred, in our fractured world, might need rooms with many doors. As these architects reshape reverence, they echo an ancient truth. Sacred space isn't about answers but questions. From Ronchamp's curves to Unity's quiet cube, from the Lotus Temple's petals to futuristic interfaith hubs, the conversation continues. And perhaps that's the most timeless design of all, a space where the search itself becomes the altar. The Lotus Temple in New Delhi rises from the earth like a half-opened blossom, its 27 marble petals glowing at dusk as if lit from within. This isn't just a temple, it's a radical experiment in sacred democracy. Designed by Iranian architect Fariborz Sobha in 1986, the structure deliberately avoids any single religion's iconography. No crosses, no crescents, no statues of deities, just pure geometry inviting Baha'is, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs of all kinds to sit in silent meditation beneath its central dome. The 9-sided design nods to the Baha'i faith's emphasis on unity, while the absence of clergy or ritual turns worship into a personal dialogue. Sunlight filters through the petal gaps, dappling the white interior with ever-shifting patterns, a visual metaphor for how light, like truth, manifests differently through various openings yet remains one. Even the materials whisper inclusion: Greek marble for the exterior, Portuguese stone for the interior, assembled by Indian craftsmen, a global collaboration mirroring its purpose. Now shift your gaze to the 9/11 Memorial's Interfaith Chapel in New York. Here, architect Craig Dykers faced a more fraught challenge, creating sacred space where grief had no single language. His solution, a non-denominational room of quiet, wrapped in salvaged steel from the Twin Towers, its walls perforated with a constellation of tiny holes. By day, these perforations cast star-like points of light. By night, they glow softly from within, transforming tragedy into a celestial map. The space holds no overt symbols, just water from all 5 New York boroughs circulating beneath the floor, a subtle nod to rituals of purification across faiths. Visitors might leave a Yazite candle, a rosary, or a Quranic verse on the shared meditation shelf, each object personal, yet part of a collective murmur of remembrance. Designing such spaces requires walking a razor's edge. How do you honor specificity without exclusion? The Lotus Temple's abstract form risks feeling impersonal to those craving ritual's tactile comforts, the scent of incense, the texture of prayer beads. Conversely, the 9/11 chapel's neutrality has drawn criticism from some families who longed for explicitly Christian or Jewish symbolism. Architects wrestle with questions like, should seating face Mecca for Muslim prayer or remain flexible? Can Hindu circumambulation coexist with Christian pews? Some solutions emerge through adaptability. Berlin's proposed House of One, a tripartite structure housing synagogue, church, and mosque around a shared forum, uses movable partitions to reconfigure space for different rites. Others, like the Rothko Chapel in Houston, strip away all but the essentials, 14 dark canvases by Mark Rothko that seem to absorb light, creating a void where disparate prayers can resonate without collision. Yet the most profound challenge isn't architectural but human. Sacred spaces derive power from centuries of layered meaning. The worn steps of a Hindu temple where generations rub their foreheads, the soot-darkened icons of an Orthodox church. Can a new building, however thoughtful, conjure that depth of collective memory? The answer may lie in patience. When the first Baha'i temples were built in the early 20th century, their radical inclusivity seemed alien. Now, the Lotus Temple's visitor logs brim with notes in dozens of scripts, proof that given time, even the most unconventional sacred space can become holy through use. As these experiments in unity unfold, another revolution is quietly preserving the sacred spaces we already have, not with mortar and stone, but with lasers and algorithms. From the digital resurrection of Palmyra's ruins to AI models predicting Notre Dame's structural stresses, technology is becoming architecture's newest guardian. When ISIS militants bulldozed the ancient temples of Palmyra in 2015, the world watched in horror as centuries of sacred geometry crumbled into dust. But beneath the headlines, a quieter revolution was unfolding. Months before the destruction, archaeologists had stealthily scanned the entire site using laser imaging, capturing every column, carving, and curve in 3-dimensional precision. Today, those digital blueprints are being used to reconstruct Palmyra's Arch of Triumph, not in Syria, but as a traveling replica crafted from Egyptian marble and Italian stone. This isn't just restoration, it's resurrection through ones and zeros. The same technology, LiDAR or light detection and ranging, has mapped Angkor Wat's hidden underground cities and revealed erosion patterns threatening Machu Picchu's foundations. By firing millions of laser pulses per second, these scanners create point clouds so dense they can detect a chisel mark on a statue's eyelid. The resulting models aren't merely backups. They're time machines, letting conservators reverse engineer damage or test restoration methods in virtual sandboxes before touching actual stone. Notre Dame's fiery collapse in 2019 unveiled another layer of this digital armor. As flames licked the cathedral's wooden roof, art historian Andrew Tallon's legacy became unexpectedly vital. Before his death, Tallon had laser-scanned every inch of Notre-Dame, from the whimsical gargoyles to the secret iron staples holding the masonry together. His terabytes of data became the Rosetta Stone for architects rebuilding the spire, proving that cracks in the vaulting predated the fire by centuries. Now AI enters the choir. Machine learning algorithms analyze medieval manuscripts to predict how original materials like lead and oak will age, while drones with thermal cameras spot moisture threats invisible to human eyes. The result, a restoration that's less guesswork and more dialogue with history. Even the cathedral's acoustics, those reverberations that made Gregorian chants sound heaven-sent, are being preserved through sound wave simulations based on pre-fire recordings. Yet digital preservation's true power lies in democratizing the sacred. Google's Open Heritage project lets anyone virtually wander the Buddhist caves of Dunhuang or Mexico's Mayan pyramids, their smartphone screens becoming stained glass for the digital age. In Afghanistan, where the Taliban dynamited the Bamiyan Buddhas, Swiss researchers used photogrammetry, stitching together thousands of tourist photos to create holograms of the lost statues. These aren't just facsimiles, they're acts of defiance against oblivion. Still, some mysteries resist even silicon ingenuity. The digital scans of Chartres Cathedral reveal an anomaly. Its famed labyrinth, laid in the 13th century, aligns with architectural errors elsewhere in the nave. Were the builders compensating for a surveying mistake, or is this intentional, a coded lesson in humility? At Egypt's Temple of Karnak, LIDAR uncovered hidden chambers beneath the hypostyle hall, their purpose still unclear. And no algorithm has yet explained how the builders of Sacsayhuamon fitted its gargantuan stones so tightly that not a blade of grass slips between them. These gaps in understanding aren't failures, they're invitations. For every pixel-perfect scan, there's a whisper in the data, something the stones still refuse to reveal. As we digitize the sacred, we're reminded that some secrets aren't meant to be solved, only honored. And perhaps that's the most ancient wisdom of all. That wonder thrives in the space between what we can preserve and what remains eternally elusive. Now consider this. What if these unsolved riddles aren't oversights but messages? The acoustic quirks of Gothic cathedrals that amplify whispers at certain spots, the celestial alignments of pyramids that modern tools confirm but can't fully explain. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so precisely aligned to true north that its margin of error is just 1/15 of a degree. How did ancient builders without compasses or satellites achieve such accuracy? Some scholars point to the star Polaris, suggesting they tracked its slow drift across the night sky. Others propose they used the autumnal equinox shadow method, where a rod's shadow at sunrise and sunset forms a perfect east-west line. But here's the catch: even modern engineers struggle to replicate this precision without advanced tools. This isn't just a quirk of one pyramid. The entire Giza plateau mirrors the constellation Orion's belt, with the Nile River echoing the Milky Way. Coincidence or a cosmic blueprint carved into the desert? Now step inside the Hagia Sophia and whisper into one of its marble columns. Against all logic, your voice travels upward, clear as a bell, to someone pressing their ear against the same column 50 feet above. This acoustic tube effect wasn't accidental. Byzantine architects embedded hollow clay pots into the walls and domes, tuning the space like a colossal instrument to amplify chants and muffle echoes. But how did they calculate the exact placement without modern sound modeling? Even more baffling are the Gothic cathedrals, where certain spots in the nave amplify whispers into audible sermons, while others cancel sound entirely. At Scotland's Rosslyn Chapel, often called the Stone Bible, a specific musical frequencies cause carvings of angels and plants to vibrate in harmony, as if the stones remember the medieval chants once sung there. Then there are the impossible joints at Peru's Sacsayhuaman, zigzagging walls of limestone boulders, some weighing 300 tons, fit together so tightly that not even a razor blade slips between them. No mortar, no visible tool marks, just seamless curves defying gravity. Theories range from sonic levitation to a lost mineral solvent that softened stone like clay. But perhaps the most haunting mystery lies in Cambodia's Angkor Wat. Satellite imaging reveals the temple's towers align with the Draco constellation as it appeared in 10,500 BCE, a date millennia before the Khmer Empire existed. Did ancient builders inherit celestial knowledge from a forgotten civilization? These enigmas have spawned wild speculation, from ancient astronaut theories to Atlantean superscience. Yet the truth might be both simpler and more profound. What if these secrets aren't evidence of lost technology, but of lost ways of seeing? Indigenous elders from the Andes describe stone cutting not as labor, but as communion, singing to the rocks until they agree to separate. Medieval masons spoke of reading the soul of a stone before carving it. Could sacred architecture be less about engineering feats and more about a forgotten dialogue between humans and the material world? The real lesson isn't in how these wonders were built, but why. A Gothic cathedral's acoustics weren't just for awe. They ensured even the poorest villager in the back pew could hear the Latin Mass. The pyramid's alignments weren't vanity. They anchored the pharaoh's soul to the eternal stars. These structures whisper a truth we've forgotten, that precision without purpose is empty. Their greatest secret isn't hidden in stone or math, but in the intention behind every chisel stroke. The belief that building for the divine demands nothing less than our fullest attention, our most patient hands, our most reverent hearts. As the moon casts shadows over Teotihuacan's Avenue of the Dead, or dawn light spills into Newgrange's inner chamber, we're reminded that these mysteries aren't puzzles to solve, but invitations to marvel. They ask us to consider not just the hands that built them, but the spirits that envisioned them, and the enduring human longing to reach beyond what seems possible, leaving behind not just answers, but questions that still stir wonder. And perhaps that's the most sacred blueprint of all. Sacred architecture does something extraordinary. It turns time into something you can walk through. These structures are more than frozen art. They're living lessons in stone, each one whispering truths about what it means to be human. Take patience, for instance. Chartres Cathedral took over 60 years to build, Cologne Cathedral 600. Generations of masons laid stones they'd never see finished, trusting that their grandchildren's grandchildren would complete the vision. There's a profound humility in that, an antidote to our age of instant gratification. As architect Christopher Wren once wrote while rebuilding St. Paul's after London's Great Fire, a building is a kind of organism. It grows according to its own laws, and no man can hurry it. Then there's the lesson of community. The raising of a Gothic cathedral wasn't just a construction project, it was a societal heartbeat. Farmers hauled stones during planting seasons, nobles donated stained glass in exchange for prayers, children gathered wildflowers to mix mortar. The buildings became collective autobiographies. Look closely at the base of Seville's cathedral, and you'll find 15th century graffiti, names of laborers carved into the stone, their only memorial. Architecture is the art of reconciliation between ourselves and the world, wrote philosopher Mitchell Sayers, and this mediation takes place through the hands of many. But perhaps the deepest teaching is about our hunger for meaning. From the pyramids to Ronchamp Chapel, these structures all grapple with the same unanswerable questions. Why are we here? What lies beyond? The Hagia Sophia's dome doesn't just cover space, it models the cosmos. Its gold mosaics dissolving into abstraction as they near the apex, as if to say, this is as far as human art can go, the rest is mystery. Buddhist stupas take the opposite approach, their solid mounds suggesting enlightenment isn't out there but within reach if we walk the path. A church is a sermon in stone, said theologian Richard Meyer, and like all good sermons, it leaves room for the listener to finish the thought. The voices of those who shaped these spaces echo this truth. Master builder Antoni Gaudí, spending his final years solely on the Sagrada Familia, called architecture, the first book of Genesis written in material form. 12 centuries earlier, the Venerable Bede described Whitby Abbey as a ladder between earth and heaven, its stones worn smooth by the feet of saints. Even secular minds find themselves awestruck. Engineer Gustave Eiffel, of tower fame, once confessed that walking into Amiens Cathedral made him believe, just for a moment, in the soul. Yet this fragile inheritance now stands at a crossroads. Climate change warps ancient timbers, wars reduce temples to rubble, and the very tides that once inspired Venice's floating churches now threaten to drown them. The stones have survived centuries, but can they survive us? As we turn to these pressing threats, we carry with us the silent wisdom of every arch, every spire, that what we build to touch the divine must first be touched by our care. Venice's Basilica di San Marco isn't just sinking, it's drowning in slow motion. Each year, the Adriatic's rising tides creep higher into its marble floors, leaving behind salt crystals that gnaw at thousand-year-old mosaics like invisible termites. Meanwhile, in Mali, the earthen mosques of Timbuktu, once vibrant with the hum of scholars, now crumble under the twin pressures of desertification and looting. These aren't isolated tragedies, they're symptoms of a global crisis. Sacred architecture, having survived centuries of human turmoil, now faces existential threats from forces both ancient and modern. The relentless grind of time, the scars of war, and the silent violence of neglect. Climate change plays no favorites. In Bangladesh, the 15th century 60-dome mosque succumbs to monsoon floods that arrive earlier and fiercer each year. Its brick foundations, designed to breathe in humid air, now wick up saline water, destabilizing walls adorned with terracotta lotus motifs. Across the Atlantic, Mexico's colonial churches tremble under hurricanes supercharged by warming oceans, their once vibrant frescoes bleeding colors into plaster. Even seemingly stable sites like Utah's Mesa Verde face new dangers. Wildfires, once rare in the high desert, now lick at ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings, their ancient timber beams tinder dry after decades of drought. Warfare transforms sacred sites into battlegrounds and casualties. The shell-pocked minarets of Aleppo's Umayyad Mosque stand as stark reminders of Syria's conflict, their intricate stone filigree reduced to rubble by artillery fire. In Yemen, the historic mud brick skyscrapers of Shibam, nicknamed the Manhattan of the Desert, shudder under Saudi airstrikes, their rammed earth walls collapsing like sandcastles. But physical destruction is only part of the story. During the Malian conflict, jihadists not only razed mausoleums in Timbuktu, but systematically burned manuscripts, centuries of astronomical charts, medical treatises, and poetry erased in smoke. As archaeologist Abdul Qadir Haidara lamented while smuggling texts to safety, they weren't just destroying buildings, they were murdering memory itself. Neglect can be as lethal as violence. In Cambodia, the jungle constantly threatens to reclaim Angkor Wat, its stone corridors choked by strangler figs whose roots pry apart mortar with botanical patience. Romania's wooden churches, masterpieces of carpentry fitted without nails, rot unnoticed as rural populations dwindle, taking traditional restoration skills with them. Even celebrated sites suffer from love. The acidic breath of millions of tourists erodes the painted caves of Dunhuang faster than any sandstorm. Yet amidst the peril, hope flickers like candlelight in a crypt. UNESCO World Heritage in Danger list has become a rallying cry, channeling funds to projects like the stabilization of Kathmandu's temples after Nepal's earthquake. In Mosul, Iraqi architects are reconstructing the Al-Nouri Mosque's iconic leaning minaret using 3D scans from before its destruction, blending 12th century craftsmanship with drone-mapped precision. Grassroots efforts shine too. In Ethiopia, villagers mix ancient recipes of crushed volcanic stone and egg whites to patch Lalibella's churches, while in Louisiana, Choctaw artisans teach new generations how to weave the cane mats that traditionally protected sacred mounds from erosion. Technology emerges as an unexpected ally. Laser scans of Palmyra's ruins now serve as digital blueprints for reconstruction, while AI predicts how rising humidity will affect the polychrome saints of Spain's Cathedral of Santiago. Some solutions are delightfully low-tech. Venetian engineers have revived medieval techniques, driving oak piles deeper into the lagoon's anaerobic mud to halt subsidence. Meanwhile, virtual stewardship programs let global adopters sponsor a square meter of endangered sites, from the stained glass of York Minster to the carved lintels of Guatemala's Tikal. What's at stake isn't just architecture, but the stories etched into every stone. When a Timbuktu mason repairs a mosque with the same earth his ancestors used, or a Kyoto carpenter replaces a shrine's cypress wood using 8th century joinery, they're not preserving relics, they're keeping faith with the future. These sites are more than monuments. They're living conversations across centuries, and their survival depends on voices joining that dialogue now. Which raises the question, how can we, scattered across the globe, become part of this rescue? The answers might surprise you, because protecting sacred architecture doesn't always require a plane ticket or a PhD in conservation. Standing in line at the Sagrada Familia at dawn, watching sunlight ignite its spires like crystallized honey, you realize something. Experiencing sacred architecture isn't just about showing up. It's about stepping into a conversation that's been unfolding for centuries. But with over-tourism threatening fragile sites and cultural sensitivities often misunderstood, how do we engage with these wonders meaningfully? Start with timing. Arrive at sunrise for Venice's St. Mark's Basilica, when the golden mosaics glow without the crowds, or visit Cambodia's Angkor Wat in the shoulder seasons, when the monsoon air amplifies the temple's mystical aura. Better yet, embrace the digital age's gifts. The Vatican Museum's virtual tours let you examine Michelangelo's brushstrokes in the Sistine Chapel closer than any in-person visit allows, while 3D scans of Petra's Alcosne reveal inscriptions invisible to the naked eye. For those craving physical pilgrimage, consider walking the Camino de Santiago, not just as a hike, but as a medieval time machine. The route's Romanesque churches, like Leon's San Isidoro with its Sistine Chapel of Romanesque art, reward slow travel. Pause at the Cruz de Ferro to add your stone to the cairn, a tradition echoing ancient wayfarers. In Japan, the Shikoku pilgrimage loops 88 temples, each stamp in your Nokaiyocho book a tactile reminder of the journey. Even urban explorations can become pilgrimages. Istanbul's Sinclair's Walk traces the footsteps of a World War I spy who sketched Byzantine cisterns, turning hidden sacred geometry into a treasure hunt. Respect is the invisible architecture of any visit. At Thailand's Wat Pho, observe how locals why before the reclining Buddha, palms pressed together, a gesture of humility. In Lalibela, remove your shoes not just at church entrances but hundreds of meters away, honoring the entire complex as holy ground. Photography etiquette matters too. Utah's Bears Ears National Monument asks visitors not to photograph petroglyphs, as some indigenous tribes believe it traps spirits. Even silence becomes sacred currency. Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth, meant for meditative walking, loses its power when selfie sticks dominate. Arm yourself with context before you go. John Julius Norwich's The World's Greatest Churches decodes architectural symbolism like a Rosetta Stone, while Diana X, India, A Sacred Geography, reveals how entire subcontinents become mythic landscapes. Documentaries like The Gates of Heaven explore Bali's temple rituals, and Cathedrals of Culture uses 360-degree cameras to walk through the Oslo Opera House's acoustics as if they were Gothic vaults. Podcasts fill gaps too. Sacred by BBC uncovers why Varanasi's Gat's pulse with eternal rituals, and 99% Invisible dissects the hidden theology in subway tile patterns. But sacred architecture isn't just found, it's felt. Sit in the whispering gallery of St. Paul's Cathedral until the space's acoustics turn strangers' murmurs into echoes of collective longing. Run your fingers along the bullet scars of Sarajevo's Gazi Husrev Bey Mosque, where stone remembers war but still cradles prayer. Or simply linger until closing time at Kyoto's Ryon Jai, when the raking of the Zen garden's gravel becomes a meditation in motion. These sites don't just belong to the past, they're alive, shifting with each respectful encounter. As the moon rises over Borobudur, casting shadow puppets of its Buddhas across the jungle, we're reminded that these structures aren't relics behind glass but waypoints in an ongoing human quest. From the moment our ancestors stacked the first stones at Göbekli Tepe to the digital scans preserving Notre-Dame's vaults today, sacred architecture has never been just about buildings. It's been humanity's most enduring conversation with the divine. Think of the Egyptian priest aligning Karnak's axis with the winter solstice sunrise, the medieval mason carving a gargoyle's grin high on a cathedral facade, or the modern engineer calculating how to stabilize earthquake-damaged pagodas with carbon fiber. Each act across millennia is part of the same story, our restless attempt to give shape to the shapeless, to build bridges between earth and eternity. What ties these wonders together isn't just their beauty, but their shared language of longing. The pyramid's celestial alignments, Hagia Sophia's floating dome, the Taj Mahal's mirrored symmetry, all whisper the same truth: that sacred space is where geometry becomes prayer. These structures defy their eras, whether carved with stone tools or engineered with algorithms. The Gothic architect and the AI preservationist, separated by 8 centuries, are kin in their devotion to keeping these dialogues alive. Even the conflicts etched into their stones, the Christian frescoes painted over Islamic calligraphy, the pagan temples repurposed as churches, speak to our unbroken, if sometimes fraught, pursuit of meaning. Yet sacred architecture's greatest lesson might be its quiet rebuke to our modern sense of time. In an age of disposable trends, these structures insist on slowness. Chartres Cathedral took generations to complete, its builders knowing they'd never see the finished spires. The Shikoku pilgrimage's 88 temples have welcomed walkers for 1,200 years, their steps worn smooth by countless sandals. There's humility in this long view, a reminder that what we make for the sacred must outlast us, carrying forward questions we're still learning to ask. So next time you find yourself beneath a vaulted ceiling or tracing the carvings on a temple wall, pause. Let your fingertips brush the stone, worn smooth by centuries of hands just like yours. Listen for the echoes of astronomers aligning pyramids to stars, of children gathering wildflowers to mix cathedral mortar, of monks chanting in languages now forgotten. These structures are more than monuments, they're living conversations, invitations to add your voice to a story that began before memory and will outlast us all. The stones have stories to tell. Lean in, they're speaking.